Welcome everybody. This is MITOHACKER podcast, and thank you very much, Mike, for joining us. So our guest today is Mike Boyle. That's a great honor. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Of course.
Thank you for all you're doing for our education.
Well, it's easy. It's good quality. So it's it sells itself. So you guys are still in a lockdown at the end of the lockdown, right?
Yes.
So you're about to open. So what did you learn in the last 2 months?
Well, one, I learned that I don't mind slowing down, to be perfectly honest. I haven't slowed down in 40 years, and I haven't missed work as much as I thought I would miss work. I've been, because I still work 3 or 4 hours every day in the morning, arranging things like this, emails. There's still a lot of other stuff to do, but I don't necessarily really miss getting up and going to the gym. And, I've been coaching a little. I've been working with my kids, so I get a little bit of coaching in. So it makes me realize that I'm probably closer to being ready to retire than I thought I was.
Okay. So what do you think? What would the other coaches think about, like your staff?
I think they miss it more. And they'll, the good thing is and you've met, some of the younger guys. We have a really good young group. So I'm much less essential than I used to be anyway. And that's really good. I always think one of my favorite quotes is the goal of the coach is to eliminate the coach. You know what I mean? When you get to the point where you've made yourself redundant, then
you're a system guy, right? Anyway.
Yes, I am I'm absolutely a system guy. I've always been because I started out as a college strength and conditioning coach by myself, coaching every team, literally. So we had Boston University, when I got there, I think we had 30 varsity sports. We had one of the largest athletic programs in the country, even though we were in like a lower division. We were only Division I in ice hockey. But I was working, tennis, soccer, basketball, hockey, football, everything. And so you have to be a systems guy if you're going to have any chance of succeeding at all. And then as a businessman, it became even more important. So the system that you develop for processing all of these college kids and trying to get a quality workout with everybody, all of a sudden became a really good system for training athletes. And then we made that into a really good system for training adults. And I don't like when you say I'm a systems guy, I look at people and I think, what are the other guys? Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't understand how you could just sort of free form this type of thing and not have, like, for me, I want, when I'm going to teach somebody, I want them to know what the progression is. I want them to know what the regression is. I want them to know, what we're looking at, what's the baseline, what's good technique, what's bad technique, all these things. I mean, everybody should have that fundamental understanding if they're going to be good at coaching. So to me, that's why I've done, I've probably been doing 2 or 3 of these a week right now. And that's one of the things I keep saying to people all the time is I don't understand how everyone doesn't agree with us, because it's so obvious to me, but it's not as obvious to other people.
I think it's a lot more easier for somebody to come into the coaching world from business, because then, they learned systems, even though it's a different system, but at least it's a system. Yeah. But many of the new coaches, without this kind of background, they think when somebody provides them a system, it's somehow they taming their free spirit.
Yes, I think there's no question. I think there's a lot of people who consider themselves more like artists, and I really don't. I would, I always used to joke that, I will very happily be the Walmart of the fitness world, and that's okay, because you look at, they sell a lot of stuff, they sell it really well, they make a ton of money, everybody's happy, and I look at that and think that's what you want versus being, and it's. I think that a part of that too, the art part is the ego, and it's the inability to let go. And for me, I need to do what I want to do to see my vision. I need a lot of really good coaches. And we've done that. Our coach education, and the same way with our certification, is really second to nobody's in the world, because we realized that years ago, I read a book called The One Thing. I don't know have you read The One Thing?
I think so. Yeah.
So the one thing basically says that the goal of the book is for you to decide on the one thing that by doing it would make everything else easier. And so as you read the book, that's all they keep talking about. You got to find your one thing. And I was very frustrated with the idea. I was like, I have too many things. It's like one thing is stupid. One thing is impossible for somebody like me. But the book kept hammering home, it's not impossible, and that you need to figure out what that one thing actually is. And by the time I got to the end of the book, I sat and I said, okay, what is my one thing? And I realized it was coach education, because the exponential growth of our business is directly related to the growth of our coaches. It has nothing to do with the growth of Mike Boyle. Mike Boyle can grow immensely. You know, I can have more followers and write more books and, you know, sell more products, whatever that is. But that's not going to have anywhere near the effect of, you know, having guys like Kevin and Brendan and Dan and, you know, all these guys that are surrounding us. That's going to allow us this exponential funnel to really get out. And that's why we're affecting coach education, I mean, around the world. I mean, we're everywhere. You know, we're in.
When was in your career, when was the time when you felt like, I think I could make more impact if we start to multiply, meaning coach education?
I'd say 10 years ago. I was about 50 when I really understood. I think when I finished the first version, you have New Functional Training for Sports behind you over your shoulder there. When I finished that book, I realized, wow, I can have a broader appeal, that writing creates a broader appeal. But then I started to look at this and think, wait a second, you know, I can think much bigger than this. Because even with a book, you know, a great seller, Human Kinetics, I remember what they said, if you sell 10,000 books, that'll be a very big success. I think that book sold maybe 40,000 books. So it was a really successful book. But that's still, you know, if two people read it, the same copy of the same book, maybe you reach 80,000 people. That's still not, you know, the exponential growth that when we create these certified functional strength coaches, like your shirt says, that person then goes out and teaches our system to hundreds more people. So when you look over the last 5 years, our reach has just been crazy in terms of, like I said, you look at, we're in almost every developed country in the world. I mean, we haven't been able to penetrate Russia, which I think we will do in the not too near future, or India. Those are the two big ones that I think are left for us to, you know, to find people like you, to find the right partner, to find somebody who kind of has, like, we need people who have what it takes to get our education to move forward. And it has to be someone like we talked about. It can't be someone with a big ego. It can't be someone who wants to make it their system. It has to be someone who can look at it and embrace it and say, hey, I can teach this, you know, in my country. I can teach this in my language. I can, because the good thing about us, like I said, it is system. It's a system based on science that makes perfect sense. And it's an adaptable system. If someone showed me better science, I'd make the system better. And we've done that numerous times, but we're always looking and saying, okay, is there a better way to do this? That's practical, because it's one thing. I mean, sometimes there may be things that might be better, but they're impractical. You know, some people will talk to me about, like, you know, the Wim Hof stuff, you know, and we're going to do cold water immersion. And I'm like, impractical, right? I mean, people aren't going to do that. You've got to be really, you know, burning desire to be better, to immerse yourself in freezing cold water. You know what I mean?
But as much as I know you, you are not afraid to create conflicts. Even your goal is not to create a conflict, right? Just the systematic thinking sometimes creates some buzz around.
Oh, absolutely does it. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not afraid of it. I don't mind it. I don't look for it. And I had that conversation with somebody the other day. It's really interesting, because there are people who hate me, but they don't know me. And they hate me because they hate my position on a certain topic. They hate me because I don't like back squatting anymore. You know, they hate me, like, there's really silly reasons why they don't like me. And, you know, I just, like I said, I look at everything. My lens, you know, if practical was a lens, like, okay, what's practical? That's my lens. You know, what's easy? What's teachable? What are the masses going to be able to embrace and understand? That's the stuff that we need.
So what is repeatable, right?
Right.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, you know, you want to be, you know, they talk about you want to be efficient and effective. You know, these are all the things that you've got to be thinking about, right? You know, we've got to have a system that's really efficient, but we've also got to have a system that's really effective. You know, if we're really efficient, but we're not effective, that doesn't really help us. If we're really effective, but we're not efficient, that doesn't really help us. If we're both of those things, where we can say to somebody, hey, I can give you an hour system to train general public. I can give you a 90-minute system to train athletes. And our 90-minute system for training athletes will have everything that you need in that system, then that's easy. And
Sure.
people, I mean, and the good thing is, it doesn't really matter because the smart people get it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all we need. We don't need, I always think, I don't need everybody in the world to train the way that I do. I just need, you know, I mean, I think, God, I mean, I should have world population stats, but it's kind of like, you know, if we could impact 10%
Sure.
of the world's population,
that's
and that's where you get into, I did look at stats one time on languages, and it's very, very interesting when you realize, I thought that getting a book into Spanish would be huge because the Spanish fitness market had been very underdeveloped. They had not translated much foreign work. And the work that most of their stuff was kind of like our 1970s, 80s US stuff. Professors, you know, writing books who never actually coached or trained. And that was where they were getting their fitness information from. And they were 20 years behind. But then I looked at the language. I mean, Spanish, I think, you know, God, half the world must speak Spanish. And then you look at the stats and you're like, not even close. Yeah. Hindi is actually the #1 spoken language in the world, believe it or not. And I think Mandarin Chinese maybe was second.
So I have a very interesting experience with your guys. So because we already had several shifts of the guys coming over to Hungary. And I had 2 things. So one of them come from my wife, and also it was my experience. They are really nice people. I mean, seriously, really nice people. The second thing was, and that was my experience, that they were extremely professional. So even though they were like really young, some of them are, you know, we've been joking like, you know, they could be our kids, but they were really professional. So my question is like, how do you pick these guys? And I'm pretty sure they went through a pretty good education, but how do you pick them?
You know, it's funny. We, you've probably read, I wrote an article one time called, you know, someone asked what the best certification was. And I said, you need to be a CNP, certified nice person. And that's what I look for first, to be honest. So when we get these kids in their internships, it is all about their personality. And I've learned over time, I've gotten involved with some people who maybe were really good coaches, but were not necessarily really good people. And that didn't end up working out really well. It was pretty disastrous, you know, in the long run. And it caused a lot of problems in the short run. And so as I got older, I very much focused on, I always say, like Steve Bigelow, has Steve been over to Hungary?
Sure.
Yeah. So Steve is a perfect example. Steve's dad is a client of ours.
Yeah, he told me.
Steve was like a finance major at UMass who needed a summer internship. And his dad came in and said, oh, my son Steve needs an internship. Can he intern here this summer? And I was like, yeah, great. You know, low expectations. Kid runs track at UMass. I'm thinking track is a really good background for strength and conditioning. So he'll be okay. Never thinking that he's going to be a friggin' rock star, right? But we get him in there and we realize he's smart, he's personable, he's athletic, he can demonstrate. And it's like, I always look at it and think, you know, we talk about like the bucket idea. Okay, all I got to do, I just got to fill that knowledge bucket a little bit because I got everything else that I need. You know, whereas you get like a Kevin Carr, Kevin's a different side. Knowledge bucket, very full. Initially, when he first came in, pretty quiet, you know, a little bit withdrawn, not as outgoing. You know, we got to get Kevin in front of more audiences, doing more speaking. Because I can remember very, very early on watching these guys speak, and we give them speaking opportunities.
Sure.
But I remember watching Kevin and Brendan speak, and Brendan was light years ahead of Kevin as a speaker. Now I watch Kevin speak, and I think I'd put Kevin on stage with anybody in the fitness world. Anybody. Like, I'll stack him up. I don't care how old, wherever the person is. I mean, put him in front of any audience. He's just absolutely marvelous as a speaker. But, you know, because he's a good kid, he works hard, they listen. I mean, these are the things that really matter. And one of the things, too, you know what we get away from, which is really, really good, is the biggest failing, I think, in strength and conditioning is taking people whose ego is really heavily involved in it. So I always said, when someone tells me I'm a competitive bodybuilder, I'm a competitive powerlifter, I'm a competitive Olympic lifter, I consider that to be a turnoff. Like, I look at that on a resume and I'm like, this guy's about himself. You know, this is a me guy. I don't need me guys.
Yes.
I need someone, you know, who tell me I'm super competitive about getting your clients better. That's what I'm really competitive about. And that won't always be a failure, But I have generally seen, when you're more worried about your workout than you are somebody else's workout, you're generally not going to be a good Mike Boyle strength and conditioning person. You got to be someone who can, you got to be able to get a 20-minute workout in. You got to be able to say, okay, I'm going to do, one leg squats, pull-ups, push-ups, and ride the assault bike for 5 minutes, and then get back out on the floor and start coaching again. Those are our kind of guys. Like has Ken been over? I don't think Ken has, because I don't think Ken had left to go work for the Bruins, but Ken was like that. You know what I mean? He's one of those guys, like sometimes he'd go weeks without working out. He's a great athlete. He was a high school quarterback in football, really good athlete, but because he'd be so busy helping everybody else that by the end of the day, he was just too tired. He's like, I'm not that into it. I don't really want to do it. And I love that about him. So I really think if you get the me people right off the bat, you're going to have trouble.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So this is one thing which is definitely a criticism against sometimes you on forums and against the guys that they don't look like super athletes, right? So it was always the entry point of most conversation, not talking about why you do what you do, but how you look like. I'm sorry, but it is what it is, right?
Yeah. I mean, I joke about it all the time. I tell people, you would never ask me for advice. If you saw me anywhere in the world, in a gym, in an airport, at a game, you would look at me and not think, oh, I got to go talk to him about strength and conditioning or about fitness. You'd never. And I mean, I'm not out of shape. I don't look terrible, but I certainly am not. I've never really looked the part. I probably looked the part maybe in my early 20s, maybe up until I was about 30. But after that, because the same thing, I never cared. I was too busy worrying about everybody else to worry about how I looked. And I think that's the way when you look at like all of our guys, none of them, you don't look at any of them and go, oh my God, wow, what does he do? What sport did he play? We're all very kind of Mike Boyle-esque in that way, pretty anonymous, pretty average. And then once you get going and you think, wow, these guys are really good at what they do. But again, that's fitness, right? That's the ego part. It's all about me. What size shirt do I wear? Am I going to wear a tank top? How tight are my shorts going to be? You know what I mean? All that stuff.
But this can be very misleading. I mean, I had the opportunity to work with some of the most special Israeli units, and quite frankly, my expectation was when I went there that they will be all super athletic and G.I. Joes basically from movies, not even close, right? But the mentality was killer. So that was a pretty much an eye-opening for me. So that was, for me, alarming and eye-opening, saying like, okay, I'm not judging by the cover any book anymore.
Right. That's it. Most of your, a lot of your elite special forces people all over the world are like that. Very, most of the guys, you kind of look at the guy and think, he probably runs to stay in shape. He could probably do a few push-ups, but you don't think. But again, like especially in the military world, the demand, like a big muscular guy is not going to be very effective for very long.
Sure. Because
he can't do the things that he needs to do in terms of, if you have to rock from place to place, if you have to run from place to place, if you have to rope down someplace, if whatever these things are, like there's sort of an everyman quality that really fits that the best. And it's generally not, that vision of the bodybuilder or the power lifter or the American football guy or whatever, that we equate with athleticism sometimes.
Now, how much the market or the sport coaches, the sport-specific coaches, starting to get that a strength and conditioning coach doesn't have to be highly specialized on the given sport, because this was one of the big conflict, as I understand.
Yeah, it's getting better. It's funny, and we've helped that too, because a lot of our guys, I can remember one of my former interns is a guy named Mike Potenza, who's been with the San Jose Sharks now, I think for maybe 15 years. And he was a small Italian soccer player. And I can remember when one of my friends said, I need a strength coach. And I said, I got the perfect kid for you. He's at Wisconsin. He's awesome. And he called me back. He said, Mike, I looked at his resume. He's 5'7" and he played soccer in college. And I was like, so what difference does that make? He's a really good strength and conditioning coach.
Sure.
But, I used to get the hockey guys all the time, well, but can he skate? And I'm like, does he need to be able to skate? Like, is he going to be your strength coach or your skating instructor? Like, what are you hiring him to do? And so it's getting better. I think the success of people, like you look at, at like whether, it's a Darcy Norman with, going to, oh my God, why can't I think of the Italian team right now? That's terrible. Roma. So Darcy goes to Roma. He's a ski racer. He goes there with Ed Lippy, another one of our guys. Ed Lippy's an American football player. And they have an unbelievable run at AS Roma. And neither one of those guys has probably ever played in a soccer game in their life. Mm-hmm. So I think people are starting to be less concerned. But there used to be that. I think coaches like a comfort zone, a security blanket kind of feel where they can talk to the person. And that's one of the things I tell our guys. You got to speak the language. It's like going to a foreign country. You got to work with soccer. You got to speak soccer. You're going to work with basketball. You got to speak basketball. You're going to work with hockey. You got to speak hockey. If you can't speak the language, that's going to be a problem. But I don't believe you need to have played the sport. I think that's slowly going away.
So how confident you are if somebody going through your education, let's say level 1, level 2, and there is a job open in, let's say, handball or soccer, it doesn't really matter. So how confident you are if the guy turns up, he would be very efficient to do the strength coach job?
Yeah, it would really come down to the personality for me. I would look and think, okay, does this guy, because the one thing about professional sports is a sales job. That's what it really is. You've got to convince the guys you know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And then you've got to convince them that what you want them to do is going to be good for them. Mm-hmm. That's not an easy thing to do. And it's very much personality driven, and it's very much a confidence thing. Because, when I went to work for the Red Sox, last time I played baseball, I was 12 years old. So it was 48 years ago that I actually played. And Little League 12-year-old baseball. I stunk at baseball. I was really bad. It was probably the worst thing I ever did as far as a player. Mm-hmm. And yet here I am with the best players in the world. But because I was good at what I did, no one ever asked me. They were like, did you play baseball? That question, I don't know if that question ever came up in conversation with anybody. Mm-hmm. And, because I knew about baseball, I understood shoulders and I understood what was going on, and I understood I could deal with the athletic training department and deal with the physical therapists. And I got along really well with the players. I could get guys to do what I wanted to do, and we won a world championship. Mm-hmm. But and I look at it and think I have 2 national championship rings in ice hockey. I've coached 1 Olympic team in ice hockey. I've coached an Olympic team in soccer, and I've coached a World Series winner in baseball. I've coached an Olympic gold medalist in judo, and I've coached an Olympic gold medalist in gymnastics.
So, and how's your judo?
Terrible. I've never done any of those things ever.
Yeah.
I did take gymnastics at Springfield College. I did take a full year of gymnastics, so I can say that but I have never, there would never be a moment where I would tell you that I could be a competitive gymnast or a competitive judo player or any of those things, but I've been able to do all of them. And without, really, to me, the thing that you realize is there's tremendous commonality in sport. And it's much less specific. Coaches want it to be really specific. Mm-hmm. But the reality of it is, you're generally speaking, the most athletic, most explosive, fastest person is usually the best.
Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about systems, so in your system, how much time and effort you spend on screenings, whatever screening is that? So when do you say, like, I know enough information, let's do it? Yeah,
I'm not. The funny thing is, I was a really big, I was very lucky in terms of, I met Gray Cook, kind of before Gray Cook was Gray Cook. He was another young guy trying to make his name in the field, and he was, starting to develop this FMS idea. So I kind of grew up in the FMS with him, watched this whole thing happen. And what I learned from him really helped our system. Mm-hmm. But I think it made our system so good that it almost negated the need for his system, in the sense that everything that we built was built around the idea of building efficiency, in squat pattern, in lunge pattern, in that single leg, straight leg deadlift pattern, their active straight leg raise, building rotary stability, building linear stability. When you look at the building blocks of our program, They are the FMS.
Yes.
That's why I would tell people the FMS underpins everything that we do, but so much so that now I don't need to do the FMS on everybody to know what I need to know. I just need to insert them into our system. The good thing about our system is, much like the FMS, okay, here's the baseline. Can you achieve it? If you can't, okay, here's the regression. You know, here's your 2. You know, I mean, it's kind of like, okay, if you're 3, we're good.
Yes.
On with the show. You know, if you're 2, here's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
Boom. If you're 1, here's what we're going to do. You know, and then we have the flip side of it. Once we've done that, okay, where are we going? You know, we always know the one thing we talk about, and I think Kevin talks about it in the lecture, because, you know, we've got so much kind of material out there, but it's like regression is immediate, progression takes time. So when I look at you and think, okay, Peter can't do X, boom, I got to regress you right now. But if I look at you and think Peter can do X really well, I might say, I'm going to have him do that for 3 weeks before I progress him.
Sure.
So there's always that phasic progression going forward, but there's immediate regression going back until we can solidify the pattern. So I'm going to look at that and say, what allows you, you know, like if you look at squat for an example, we might say, okay, can you do a goblet squat? All right, if you can't, no. You know, well, let's put your heels up. Nah, that doesn't work either. Okay, let's put a band around your knees. Oh, that doesn't work either. Okay, let's try a press out squat. Does that work? No, let's go. Let's hold on to a band. You know what I mean? We'll just keep going. Sure. It's like backwards, 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 backwards until we hit that point where we think, okay, I like that squat pattern. And I think it's that way with everything that we're doing in terms of you regress back to the point where you get a pattern that, you know, I always tell everybody, my thing now is, would you YouTube it? Would you Instagram it? You know, would you put that on your Instagram? Would you put it on your YouTube page? If you would, then it's good. If you wouldn't, if you'd go like, I don't want people to see that, okay, then we need to work on that. And I think that's a really simple kind of acid test for things as you look at stuff, is that just that idea of, you know, I always talk, like in my second book, I talked about the idea of the mirror in the window. And, you know, your clients are the mirror that you see yourself in. So if you don't like the way your clients look, that's the mirror. You're looking in the mirror. You know, I said, if your clients suck, you suck. You know, that's the harsh reality of life. But it's the same way. It's the window. You know, you look at my windows out here. Like if I look out, if I just was watching people train in my yard, I would be able to judge whether I thought you were a good coach or a bad coach by how the people moved that I looked at through the window. Even though I couldn't hear you coach, couldn't see what you were saying to them, I could look at your clients and look at your interaction and decide if it was good or bad. And I tell our coaches, you've got to be thinking about that all the time, that mirror and window idea, because that will help you to decide, am I doing my job? Am I being effective?
Now you said something really interesting. You mentioned at least 3 times patterns. So how long did it take for you to take from muscles to patterns?
All right, so let's say I started training in, I'm going to say I started training about 1970, 72, somewhere in there, right? I probably went to my first Gary Gray seminar in about 1994. So I'm going to say it took me 25 years to make that transition to patterns. Because around the same time I met Gary Gray, I was listening to Vern Gambetta, and I was starting to hear people say things, think movements, not muscles. And I remember hearing that and thinking, yeah, that's, you know, and it was that shift from, you know, upper body, lower body, or chest, shoulder, tricep kind of workouts, legs, back, and bicep workouts to what was, and it's really interesting, it was really Ian King's system when you look back at it. And Ian, and it's funny because he's become another one of these guys who's very unhappy with people because he did something really, really good that didn't help him. He created vernacular. Do you know what I mean? He literally created a system that everybody else adopted. And as a result, he gets no credit for it. Because he was the first one who started talking about upper push, upper pull, knee dominant, hip dominant.
Yes.
And that made so much sense to so many people like me that I adopted that. And now people would say, oh, that's Mike Boyle's system. But the reality is that's, you know, that's 1990s Ian King. That's Get Buffed, if you remember that book. Was his, you know, and it was really funny, Get Buffed. What a terrible name.
Yes, but it sounds good, I guess, with this.
Yeah, title. And at that time, But, you know, he was a guy who was way ahead of his time, and
Sure.
people openly, you know, kind of hijacked his stuff and used it. And because he was in Australia, I don't think he ever got, you know, he's one of those guys who never got the credit in the mainstream that he probably deserved. But sometimes that's the reality of when you do something. It's kind of like if you're the guy that invented Kleenex, you know, it's never like a, you know, just something to blow your nose on again. It's a Kleenex. You know, you created something that becomes the word for that thing. But the result of that is that you lose your brand.
Yes.
And I think that's what happened to Ian.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that in your system, let's say back squat is not something that you are chasing. And you have the whole idea and argument behind it. So, and I see that you guys are preferring more like Goblet Squat as a teaching tool, and also for heavy goblets, by the way.
Yeah.
So what was the idea behind, briefly, that you say, like, I think it's a very valid argument?
The problem was too many people got hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And it was too much time spent banging square pegs into round holes. Mm-hmm. We were trying to, you know, because again, when the one thing, like, people who argue with you are like Olympic lifters or power lifters. If you get people that are natural squatters, then squatting is natural. But when you get people that aren't, it's really unnatural. One of the big defining moments for me actually was one day I'm sitting in my office. We had a basketball player. His name was Jason Scott. Jason was 6'8", great kid. One of my favorite guys we've ever had over time. Just, you know, a bright, articulate guy. But we're sitting down, and he was one of these guys who just, I mean, I tried like hell to teach him to squat. And eventually I was like, you know something, Jason, you're a step-up guy. You know, you're not a squat guy. And I didn't have a real good reason. It just was one of those, like, I can't figure out why he's not made for it. I knew that. Like, I knew he wasn't made for it.
Sure.
But the interesting thing is we're sitting in my office in two identical chairs talking, and I realize we're talking eye to eye.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, Jason, stand up. And he stands up, and he's 11 inches taller than me.
Sure.
I'm like, sit down again. And he sits down again, and he's the same height as me. You know, and here I am. I always said, these are kind of the I can't believe I didn't think of this moments. But I look at him and think, my God, he's got 11 inches more femur and tibia than I do. And then you go to the FMS stuff and you realize that tibias don't change in height that much. Mm-hmm. Like a long tibia might be 20 inches, a short might be 18. You know what I mean? Somewhere in there. So really, this guy's got about 9 more inches femur than I do. Then you start to think about your physics again, and you think, what's the displacement of his pelvis with 9 more inches of femur and the same spinal column as me?
Sure.
It's like, this, I mean, literally doesn't add up, right? It just doesn't stack up. I look at that guy. I look at people like that now, and I think they're always going to be hurt. They're always going to have back pain.
Yes.
And so, you know, so then I start looking at that and thinking, okay, that's my basketball players, right? Like my forwards, you know, my centers, my bigger guys. But then I realize it's also my left tackles in football. You know, my bigger offensive linemen are going to be more basketball type bodies. It's my rowers. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like all these different people. And then I start thinking, wow, you know, this is why 20% of our athletes struggle with squatting. 20%, you know, I can remember when the reason the time I came to the change, I was doing American football, and we had about 100 guys, and we had something at that time, we were calling it back school. And it was, you know, low back rehab stuff that guys who were having problems with their back had to do. I had 20 guys in back school out of 100. And I thought, that's not right. Like 20% of my guys shouldn't be so sore or in so much pain that they're daily seeing the trainers for low back pain. Mm-hmm. But, you know, and I'd switch guys off. You know, guy had hurt his back. We'd have him front squat for a while. Then he'd be itching to back squat again. We'd let him back squat again. And almost immediately he'd get hurt again. And after a while, I was like, why are we doing this? And then, obviously, you know, then you combine that with the Gary Gray functional idea. You know, Gary starts talking about the idea that everything changes when your foot hits the ground. Everything changes when you stand on one leg. And you start thinking, wait a second, we never do this. So this is a relatively non-specific exercise. Then you start getting into the bilateral deficit research that tells you that neurologically, we're not very efficient bilaterally. We're much more efficient unilaterally.
Mm-hmm.
And Kevin, I need to find it. Kevin had an article that we saw one time that basically the premise was that bilateral lifting makes your body dumb.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you less athletic. And then I started thinking about, because I was a competitive power lifter. So then I go back to the competitive powerlifting idea and say, okay, how many guys did I see at powerlifting meets that I felt were great athletes? Do you know what the number was? In my mind, you're smiling. You know the number. 0. There wasn't one guy there that I ever saw at a powerlifting meet that I thought was a great athlete. But so I started looking at this and thinking, wait a second, this really heavy bilateral emphasis just makes you really good at this heavy bilateral emphasis. And if it was as good for everything else as we say it is, why aren't these guys better athletes? Why aren't these, why isn't the world powerlifting champ, the guy, whatever his name is, the mountain that just deadlifted 1,000 pounds, why doesn't he play in the NFL? He could make a lot more money.
Yes. Because
he's not a good enough athlete to play in the NFL. He was a basketball. He was an Icelandic basketball player or something, not even good enough for like a good European league, much less the NBA, yet capable of being the strongest man in the world. That shows you that strength is not the be all end all, and that it's really about the athleticism. So it was this kind of collective consciousness raising, I guess, as I went along.
Mm-hmm. How much in your philosophy, how much you are focusing on the do no harm kind of?
Oh, I mean, that's rule 1.
Mm-hmm.
That's why, again, CrossFit, right? Same thing. Why was I not a CrossFit fan? I was not a CrossFit fan because CrossFit people would say, getting hurt is part of training. If you're going to train hard, you're going to get hurt. I was like, I'm out right off the bat. You lost me. You lost me on, the first sentence. And because to me, and this is the thing, when you've never worked with great athletes, you don't understand do no harm.
Mm-hmm.
When you've worked with great, or even like special forces work, right?
Yeah, and also handball, yes.
But the greatest ability is availability, right?
Agree. Yes.
You want, what do they want there? We want guys that can go on missions.
Exactly.
You don't want to hurt them. When you're working with athletes, whether it's handball, basketball, football, they want people that can play in the games. And the coaches would get mad. Like, it's not a weightlifting contest. It's a basketball game, right? And, and we're going to get measured by how good we do at basketball. No one's going to care what we lifted. So we had to look at that and think, okay, I need to enhance performance in this with the idea first that I need to maintain this person's availability,
mm-hmm.
because their availability is the primary thing that somebody's looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So I said to somebody the other day on a podcast, I said, if I could figure out a program that had you lifting feathers and achieved what I wanted you to do, I'd be waving feathers around. I wouldn't care. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's like, lowest system load, maximum benefit, minimum load, all those things that we talk about, because that all makes sense. Why should I run the mileage up unnecessarily with heavy loads when I don't need them?
And just in the same time, while you are saying this, you are not saying these athletes are weak by any standard. Right. I mean, sometimes I see videos you guys are sharing, girls are doing single leg work, and I see, with the chain and everything, I'm like, wow, that's tough.
Right. And that's the difference. And I think that's where people lose something in the translation, because they think just because I don't like the risk benefit ratio of the back squat, mm-hmm. that no one picks up a heavy weight. You can come in our gym sometimes and see, like you said, women, split squatting with a pair of 75-pound dumbbells in their hands.
Yes.
And people walk in and they're like, holy shit, these girls are really strong.
Yes.
And, you'll watch a baseball player dumbbell benching, 90-pound dumbbells, a pitcher, and people are like, he's pretty strong. And I'm like, yeah, he's really strong. But, we're not barbell bench pressing with our pitchers. Nobody's doing a back squat. I don't need overt demonstrations of strength to prove that I'm doing my job. I need overt demonstrations of athletic prowess to prove that I'm doing my job. When you watch, you watch a guy like Jack Eichel in the NHL and you watch the way that he skates and you think, hey, he's pretty good. Why worry about, no one's looking at, what does he squat?
Yeah.
So he's really strong. Like he can, we don't squat, but he can deadlift probably 500 pounds. He's well over a double body weight, probably in like the 2.5 body weight category, but still doesn't, it's not our end goal by any stretch of the imagination.
Now, the other thing, which is very obvious, that you guys are not really a tool guy. So I'm talking about equipment. So you are not falling in love with equipment just because they are sexy and new and whatever. But I see that you guys are really hesitant to put them in, but when you put them in, they fit into the system. So, for example, at one point you say that I rather use the trap bar instead of the barbell.
Yeah.
So what is the decision there, right?
The decision there, I had this conversation the other day. The trap bar is just another one of these things that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Because the bar passes through your body. Again, if you understand, like, that's why I always get mad at people, because I feel like I was a power lifter. I competed in powerlifting, but the bar in the deadlift is the problem. You have to move your shins around the bar. You have to get the bar to navigate your shins and come over your knees. Sure. And that's why if you look, sometimes powerlifters, you'll see, the rips on the shins. You'll see somebody bleeding through their socks because they're dragging that bar really, really tight up their shins. And I look at that and think the trap bar eliminates that. Mm-hmm. That just makes sense. And then the trap bar accommodates so much better because of that to body type. I talked about in new functional training for sports, I think I used the term squat lift because it's kind of like you can do a squatty deadlift if you want to. When you put somebody in the trap bar, I always tell somebody in the trap bar, like, I just look at them and say, reach down and grab the bar. And I look at how they reach down to grab the bar. Some people will do it in a very hingy way. Some people will do it in a very squatty way. When I look at it and I think, okay, that's how that person deadlifts. And I don't tell them, oh, this is a hinge. I don't tell them this is a squat. I tell them this is a pick something heavy up from the ground exercise that most people will do in something that looks like a deadlift. I would say the majority. Mm-hmm. But certain people who are segmentally different will do it more like a squat. And some people that, they're squatting that weight. And I'm like, I said this the other day in the podcast, I was a sumo deadlifter when I powerlifted because I was a better squatter than a deadlifter. Like I could probably sumo deadlift 450 and conventional deadlift 400. So what am I going to do in a meet? I'm going to sumo deadlift, right? I'm going to squat. Sure. Yeah, I'm going to squat my deadlift, right? I'm going to get into my squat stance. Sure. I'm going to get my shins up against the bar, and I'm going to squat that weight up while I hold on to it with my hands. That makes sense. That's trap bar to me, is that it gives you that ability, that flexibility, not in the conventional term, but the ability to choose a position that suits your body better.
Mm-hmm. Now, regarding to power development, so when the foundation is there, both structurally, movement-wise, and strength-wise, are you using traditional weightlifting exercises?
Yes, I love Olympic lifting if people can do it. In a perfect world, everybody would Olympic lift. Like when I had our women's Olympic ice hockey team, everybody Olympic lifted. All the girls cleaned, all the girls snatched, all the girls dumbbell snatched. But hang position above the knees. Same idea, because again, it's an equalizer. We eliminate the difficult portion of Olympic lifting is getting the bar from the floor to the position above the knees. I look at that and think, I can eliminate that. I'm not an Olympic lifter. I can just put the bar above their knees and work from there. So I can work on my power production where I need it in those kind of end ranges. But, but like our NHL guys, very few of them still Olympic lift because we get them from a more diverse group of backgrounds and we have them for a short period of time. If I have a group of people from a really diverse group of backgrounds and I have them for 12 weeks, I'm not going to start trying to teach that guy to clean. I'm not going to take a 22-year-old and start trying to work on, the upper body positioning to be good at Olympic lifts. But like my son at 15, he's been Olympic lifting for 5 years. Yeah. He's pretty good at the clean now. He's at, he's not crazy, but like he can easily clean 60 kilos for 5, as a 15-year-old. He's, so he's approaching, cleaning his body weight for 5 reps. And, so most of his friends, they're all in about the same category because we've been doing it. I love it with kids. I think it's incredible for general athleticism. I would liken it to tumbling, you know, in terms of your ability, because the good Olympic lifting, you're moving around the bar. You're moving the bar, but you're reacting to the bar. You're developing your ability to time the bar and catch the bar and all that stuff. And with Olympic lifting, what I love about Olympic lifting is it's collision. I think it's very preparatory for collision sports when you start thinking about, you know, sports like ice hockey or football, or things where you're going to have to smash into somebody. I think somebody that can catch 400 pounds up here probably going to be pretty good at bumping into somebody else, because he's used to getting bumped into by 400 pounds and it doesn't rattle his system at all, you know? And so I think there's a lot of really good stuff that comes out of it from a powerlifting standpoint. But I wrote an article one time called Power Cubed, because I always talk about the idea that we need body weight power, we need light implement power, we need heavy implement power. Olympic lifting is heavy implement power. Trap bar jumps are heavy implement power. You know, medicine balls, swings, things like that might be considered light implement power. And then, you know, plyometric work, jumping is going to be body weight power. We need, that helps us kind of surf that force velocity curve. So we're not just focusing on one type of power development. And then you need, same way with, you need unilateral power. You need unilateral decelerative ability. Like there's all these things that are kind of ingrained in our system that it takes somebody who's really smart to analyze our system and kind of look and go, I see exactly what they're doing. You know, someone who's intelligent looks at our system and is like, oh, they got all the pieces fit in. Someone else looks at it and goes, you know, why do you do that? Why do you hop this way? Why do you go this? Why do you do that? And it's like, you know, we need to hop medial and lateral. We need to be able to decelerate unilaterally coming towards the midline. We need to be able to decelerate unilaterally going away from the midline. We need to be able to decelerate unilaterally going forward, you know, in a linear progression. You know, there are all these things that we need to be able to do. And that's all kind of part and parcel to injury prevention, ACL prevention, all that stuff. Like I had somebody the other day saying, you know, I did a lot of one leg squatting and we didn't, you know, we had more ACLs. And I'm like, well, it's not just unilateral strength. You know, there's, you know, you have unilateral power, you have unilateral deceleration. Like there's all of these components of unilaterality, if that's a word even, but that, you know, that have to go together to create the right end effect.
Sure. And single leg squat, even like pistol, is, even though it's a really amazing exercise, it's still sagittal plane.
Right.
Right. So
yeah. And it's a really good piece of the puzzle.
Exactly.
You know, if you were doing a puzzle, you know, I'd look at it might be a corner, you know, when you're doing a puzzle, you always think, oh, if I get the 4 corners, you know, I'll be able to fly through this puzzle. You know, single leg squatting, you know, pistol type squatting, that might be one big corner of the puzzle, but that ability to stick a single leg landing going medially and laterally might be the other 2 corners. And then there might be something else up here that has to go in so that I can put this whole sort of ACL injury prevention puzzle together. I need to have these really fundamental pieces.
Yeah, and this is my argument sometimes with our BJJ guys when, you know, they doing heavy back squat. I just ask them like, so when is the very time in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu when you are actually in bilateral stance? Like never. I don't get it, the whole thing. So,
and that's why I always say to the guys, I'm like, show me, like I tell guys that, show me something that you're going to do that looks like this.
Yeah.
And you know, particularly with the bilateral, like I always say to people, rowing. You know, if a rower came to me and said, I want to do back squats because I'm going to be bilaterally pushing with both feet all the time, I might be like, you know, you got a point. Let's do back squats. Exactly. I still might try to talk them into goblet squats or front squats or something else, but at least there's an argument there that's valid. Yes. That's not present anywhere else in the sports world. Nowhere.
Yes. So as you said, like even though there is a, let's say, exercise or an equipment, which is, it seems pretty efficient and it looks good. But if it doesn't fit in a system or too complex to teach it, you would not consider to get it in, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that we talk about that all the time in terms of.
And that is what you said regarding to the cold immersion training, that it's probably, it's too difficult for most people. So you're not saying it's not good. You're saying like, for this very purpose, it doesn't fit to the system. Now, where does breathing fits to your
Yeah,
system.
breathing's interesting. I think breathing fits in the system, but breathing is tough. Breathing's, it's funny. I'm reading Oxygen Advantage right now, which is a guy who was a Buteco.
He's my teacher.
Yeah, right. So, but breathing is really hard. You have to have the right audience. I would say, we're scratching the surface right now of breathing. We're trying to get people to understand nasal inhale, pursed lip exhale, some of these things, but we're nowhere near, I don't think we're anywhere near where we might be 10 years from now. But the difference is, but I used to joke about breathing. I used to be like, all my clients breathe. Don't worry about it. I don't have any, if anybody, thank God nobody's died. No one stopped breathing yet. And then I realized like that was an incredibly ignorant point of view. But it was because I was ignorant. I hadn't really been educated, in this whole breathing world. Like, it's amazing. Have you read Range? David Epstein's book, Range?
No.
Okay. So, great book. He wrote Sports Gene. Did you read Sports Gene?
Yes.
Yeah. So he Range is his last book. But one of the things he talks about in Range is the idea, and I have to look it up so I know exactly but basically what he said is that there are things from other disciplines that are out there that we just never make contact with. And breathing was one of those things. It was really interesting when we started to look at things like pursed lip breathing or nasal breathing or whatever it was. When we started Googling that, respiratory therapy came up. And you realize that, that people that were working in hospitals with people, say with, emphysema or COPD or things like that were, they knew all this stuff years ago. And we just didn't look. It's not new. It's not new information. It's just new to us. And there's a lot of stuff like that. Like there's a guy named Alex Natera. Alex is an Australian rules football coach, strength coach in Australia. And he did a really cool single leg training study. But one of the things he looked at was percentage of body weight in a single leg exercise. And his data came from a study of pilots to find out how much body weight was in the seat when they were in a plane. And so they had done all these measurements and whatever of pilots, and they realized that 68% of your body weight was basically from your butt up. So 68% of your body weight was in the seat. So the logical conclusion, 32% is your legs, right? And so when you're standing on one leg, you have 84% of your body weight working. Yeah. You know what I mean? So, but that came from a study on pilots. It had nothing to do with strength and conditioning or fitness. But here was a guy who went, kind of took a little right turn to look at some stuff that had nothing to do with strength and conditioning and came back with, like, for someone like me, really good ammunition, because now I look at it and think, wow, I need to, now I know when I do a one leg squat, like if I do a one leg squat and I've got 5 pounds in each hand, I've got nearly 100% of my body weight on that one leg. Yes. So, if I'm doing that one leg squat, I'm one leg squatting pretty close to 180 pounds. And then, I can start to figure out, okay, how do I add weight to that? What percentage? Like that's what we've been playing around with now, is trying to really, a couple of years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I really worked on pushing those one leg squat numbers up. And then I think we got a little complacent again. So we used to have a lot of people that could one leg squat with 100 pounds of external load, between dumbbells and vests and things like that. We don't have as many now. And that's one of my goals for this summer, is that we get more people who are able to do that type of stuff again.
So regarding to what you say about breathing, when they asked Professor Buteco about could his system help to the Soviet sport team, Olympic team, to win more goals, he said, like, I'm only dealing with people with COPD and asthma. I have no idea what you're talking about. I have no time for that. So you figure out. So, and that was 50 years ago, if not more. So I agree with you. My fear only regarding to breathing is it's becoming so popular that, again, there will be way too much information on the market, and most of them will be, again, junk. But we'll see.
Right. But that's fairly typical. That was kettlebells 10 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody was a kettlebell instructor. They were, every time you turned around, there was another guy who was teaching kettlebells, you know what I mean? And then, Now people use kettlebells, but it's, you know, you've got like basically like whatever, you know, Dragon Door people and Pavos people, you know, you've got two groups now that are doing it, and that's about it. Whereas 10 years ago, there might have been 20 groups doing it all over the place.
Agreed.
And it's the same idea, because everybody was like, oh, you know, you got to do kettlebells. And I was like, you know, I had the same thing. I used to argue with people, like, they're tools. They're weights. You know, they're different weights. They're funny weights. They work differently. They do some really cool things. But ultimately, they're weights.
Yeah, but is there a system behind, right? That's the question.
Right, and then in some cases there was really good, you know, and like we took what we always do.
Yeah.
We took pieces of that and brought it into our system. You know, there was a time when I was very anti-kettlebell. And then I started, because, you know, it was like, you know, I have to admit, I didn't like the Pavel thing with like the military and the military outfit and a lot of that stuff. I thought, that's kind of, you know, whatever. Too much marketing, too cheesy, you know what I mean, for me. You know, super secret Russian training technique, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, but that was a Dragon Door part. Let's put it this way. I'm just defending Pavel here.
Yeah, no, I'm saying, but that for me was what kind of made me.
No,
like,
I understand. I understand. And
then eventually, over time, it kind of wears you down. You're like, well, there's an awful lot of people who like these things. Let's look at it. Let's figure out why do they like this so much, even though I'm a little bit resistant to it. And it was that way kind of with breathing. You know, all of a sudden breathing, you know, people was like, you get 3 or 4 or 5 smart people talking about breathing, and you start thinking, maybe I'm missing something here. Maybe, you know, because I looked at breathing like everybody, you know, it's autonomic, it's reflexive, everybody does it. Yes. And so how do you improve that? And I can remember Sue Falsoni came and did a talk, and I love Sue, and her breathing chapter of her book is worth the price of the book. I say it all the time. She did a really good job on the breathing chapter, but she literally said, and she says it all the time, the diaphragm is my favorite muscle. And I remember sitting there thinking, diaphragm's a muscle? You know what I mean? I was kind of like, well, it kind of is, but, you know, and in my mind, I'm thinking, you know, is a muscle if you can't train it with a weight? You know what I mean? Like, that's what's going through my head.
Sure.
But then, obviously, as I learned more, you're like, yeah, it's a muscle. It's a really important muscle.
Very important muscle, yes.
You know, and if it didn't work, you'd be dead.
Yeah.
But I didn't, you know, no one, I mean, you know, in strength and conditioning or fitness or physical education, no one talked about the diaphragm. I don't think diaphragm was even brought up in my anatomy class. And if it was maybe for like a sentence. Same thing, deep abdominal muscles, transverse abdominal muscles. I mean, we didn't even talk about it. We glossed over that stuff in a second.
Now, regarding to prevention, and this is pretty much the end of our conversation, because I know you have to go.
It goes by fast, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's amazing. So I see another interesting trend now, especially in let's say functional training, that, you know, there are so much focus on prevention, they are not training anymore. They're just doing all kind of stuff. So did you notice that? Or it's only me?
That's the problem that you run into, is that, and that's that sort of overreaction, underreaction. You know, that was that way, you know, that was how it was with the FMS. Well, you got to screen them. You got to, like, just train them, for God's sake. Like, you know, like, understand the concepts, get the training done. You know, we don't need a million corrective exercises. We don't need all these things. We need good, solid training. But it's everybody. And it was really interesting because I was just reading some Ian King stuff today, by just strangely enough. And he was the one apparently who coined this sort of, you know, an overreaction in the short term. And there's always an overreaction in the short term. There's always, you know, everybody gets so excited about stuff.
The pendulum, basically.
I can remember, you know, when I was with the Exos guys, we were doing all this core board stuff and all kinds of mobility work. And it was, you know, I used to be like, hey, at some point these guys got to lift weights. You know, we can't spend all day thinking around, you know, doing overhead squats and pushing on the core board and, you know, doing ankle mobility. It's like, let's get going here. And the good thing for us, we never went down that road. We never went down that rabbit hole. We've always been, you know, yes, there's been different ways. You know, I've always said all that stuff, the good stuff, is warm up. And we're going to roll it all in the warm up. You know, whether it's self-massage techniques with the foam roller, whether it's breathing, whether it's mobility work, whether it's flexibility work, whatever it is, we're going to roll that all into the warm-up. Even running mechanics, sprint mechanics, we're going to roll all that into the warm-up. Everything. But when that's all done, we're going to go lift weights.
Sure.
And if you move well, you're going to lift heavy weights. Like people always said, I am a huge fan of progressive resistance exercise. People will ask, I always said, we're one of the few gyms that has lots of Olympic 1 1/4 plates. Like in your case, it would be, half kilo plates. Mm-hmm. But we have tons of them, because when I've got kids or women or whatever, people say, what do I do? Go up 2.5, put a 1 1/4 on each side. Try to do a little bit more. Engage progressive resistance. Do one more rep. Do a little bit more weight. It's amazing. I've gotten people to be just beastly strong with programs that people would say they're too simple, they wouldn't work. And I'm like, actually, they work. Trust me, if you get people to commit to progressive resistance exercise on a regular basis and they don't miss workouts, they'll get strong.
Sure. Coach, I try to respect your time. I have to say I had like about 30 questions. I believe I asked about 4. So maybe next time. But anyway, I really appreciate your time. I wish you all the best. And because
I will tell you, I appreciate your efforts. I appreciate what you're doing for us in Hungary.
Thank you.
It's been a very it's an effective partnership. If we could find people like you in every country, and we're doing it, we're getting, we're developing a really good group of like-minded people who are industry first people, which is what we need. Mm-hmm. Then we are literally going to change the world. Trust me, we're going to change the training world. People will think differently and talk differently 10 years from now as a result of the work that you did in Hungary.
Thank you, sir. And I wish you luck with reopening your gyms.
I think
that's about time.
Be interesting. We'll hopefully once we get it going, we'll get some videos up. All right, I'm going to go.
Great.
I'm going to go have beer and eat dinner.
It was nice talking to you. Bye.
All right.
Bye.